Modern history records the Drake Well in Pennsylvania as the birthplace of the oil and gas industry. But decades before Edwin L. Drake struck oil in Titusville, Pennsylvania, oil fever burned in Western Virginia. The story of the oil and gas industry is entwined with the story of how and why Western Virginia split from Virginia, and it yields a significant event in world history. The first oil field ever targeted for destruction in war was in Wirt County along the Little Kanawha River. It's a plot line that still today breeds bickering over who lays claim to where it all began. Long before the arrival of European settlers, Native Americans were aware of burning springs.
Well, the burning spring would simply mean that it was a place where natural gas was coming up and people would set fire to it. And so hence the word burning spring, and often it was associated with water, and hence the term spring goes with it. It was a great novelty.
In 1771, George Washington laid claim to 125 acres of land along the Kanawha River as partial payment for his services in the French and Indian War. He specified that he wanted land near Malden, in then Western Virginia, because it had a burning spring. Washington wrote a letter to Thomas Jefferson, remarking on the potential of the spring, making him perhaps our nation's first speculator. Early settlers, however, were far more interested in salt than in oil and gas. In the Kanawha Valley of Western Virginia, one of those early settlers was Joseph Ruffner. Ruffner bought a tract of land sight unseen because he was interested in the fertility of the rich river bottom and the potential value of a naturally occurring salt lick, a place where salt brines seep to the surface from underground sources.
Well, the Ruffner brothers were looking for salt water. Salt was a major commodity. In fact, during the War of 1812, one of the things that the British did to punish us was to cut off our salt supply. And so it was imperative that we get salt for preservation. There was no refrigeration, you didn't have freezers, and the only way to preserve things for a long period of time was to salt them.
In 1797, Ruffner leased the salt lick and surrounding land to Elisha Brooks. Brooks would establish the first commercial salt operation in the Kanawha Valley. The Ruffners, meanwhile, had purchased an additional tract of land next to the Dickinson family and began manufacturing salt as well. Ultimately, the area had a drilling boom. By the end of 1810, 16 furnaces boiled the brine into salt. Just 5 years later, that number swelled to 52. In time, this 10-mile stretch along the Kanawha River became the largest salt-producing area in the antebellum United States. While drilling for salt brine, borers would often be disappointed to find oil and gas instead. The presence of oil and gas ruined a brine well. With an insatiable need to fuel the salt furnaces in which the brine was boiled down to salt, and with a diminishing supply of lumber, industrious businessmen turned to natural gas as a fuel source. They built pipelines of wood to heat their furnaces. Their ingenuity in 1831 is the first documented case in the United States of natural gas being used as a manufacturing heat source. Until the 1850s, the commercial value of oil was for medicine and as a lubricant. But its demand soared dramatically when it became the raw ingredient of choice in the making of kerosene. In the words of J.R. Dodge, that's when oil, formerly a literal drug, became a drug in a mercantile sense.